Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Promoting Meaningful Making in Your School. I'm Matt Mulder, Executive Director of Innovation at Demco, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through some housekeeping details, and then I'll introduce our speaker, and he can start today's presentation. On your screens, you should see a question box on the right-hand side. If you have a question or need technical help, please use this box to communicate with us. If we don't get to your question during the session, we will be posting questions and answers along with the recorded webcast, presentation slides, and resources after the event. You will receive an email in about a week letting you know when everything is available. You'll also notice our presenters' contact information as well as mine. Please feel free to contact us directly with any questions that haven't been answered in the follow-up resources. We are also using Twitter today with the hashtag DemcoIdeas. You should be able to see this hashtag on the side of your screen in the chat box. We are monitoring that feed as well for questions and comments. I believe that's all the housekeeping, so let's get started with the program. As I mentioned, I'm Matt Mulder and I'm moderating today's session, and I'm very excited to introduce to you to our speaker today, Nicholas Provenzano. Known as the Nerdy Teacher, Nicholas is the Technology Coordinator and Makerspace Director at University Liggett School in Michigan, and is also a prolific author, speaker, and consultant. He writes on his website, thenerdyteacher.com, edutopia.com, and many other prominent educational websites. Nicholas has been featured on CNN.com, Education Week, the New York Times, and other media outlets, and is the author of the best-selling book, Your Starter Guide to Makerspaces. In 2013, Nick was awarded the Technology Teacher of the Year by McCall and ISTE. He is also a Google Certified Innovator, Raspberry Pi Certified Educator, and a TED-Ed Innovative Educator. Nicholas is sharing plenty of nerdy things on the Ideas and Inspiration site, and you can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at The Nerdy Teacher. We're so excited to have Nicholas with us today to talk about promoting meaningful making in your school. So it looks like we're ready to get started, and Nicholas, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Wow, it's always so weird to hear people read about what you've done over the years, but I've been very lucky to have an opportunity to work with some great educators all around the world and to be able to share all of that. And that's what I'm here to do today, is share some amazing ideas in regards to makerspaces, but really that next level of meaningful making. So that's where we're at today, and we're going to start talking, there we go, about meaningful making. So the first thing that we need to do is really sort of define what making is. So if we can have that shared definition, it allows us to sort of move forward with what we're talking about. So for me, making is the creation of something new that was not there before. I like broad definitions. And the reason for that is that I think that making is a little bit of everything. It doesn't have to be something strictly relegated to science. It doesn't have to be something relegated to the STEM or STEAM fields. It is something that all of us do on a regular basis, whether we realize it or not. Another part of making for me is that making is about failing as much as it is about making itself. These are some little images I've put together of what making can look like. Making is a lot of mistakes, and we need to embrace that. So sometimes there's this idea that, when makers create things, it is perfect and wonderful the first time around. As teachers, especially working with students as we talk about meaningful making, part of that process is being okay with failure, encouraging kids to push through failure, or most importantly, to learn from failure. So we need to embrace that as part of the overall idea of what making is. The other aspect of it for me as a arts teacher, I was a literature teacher for 15 years before I started this new role at University Liggett School. The arts are an important part of the conversation when we talk about STEM. It should really be STEAM. The arts, I like to say, STEM will make something work, arts will make it pretty. So we want to support all of those young makers that are looking to dive into STEAM, because they can bring a different aspect to the design process, the creation process. So we definitely don't want to exclude any students. And for me, making is such an inclusive act that we want to make sure that every single student feels like they have a voice and a path to make. Um, Here's a picture of my son. He is currently almost 7. He lost his first tooth yesterday, as a matter of fact. He's really excited about that, and he is in first grade. And here he is looking at a microscope. And we were at a store, and he saw it. He's like, "Dad, I want a microscope. I want to look into it, and I want to see things." So we got home, and he immediately started to go outside and look for things that we can put under a microscope. And he had this passion and this drive to investigate and to explore. And it's really important that at a young age, we encourage this across the board, because this need and want to explore is what leads us to making, because we want information and then we want to replicate or create our own or create a better version of that. As my son, the very young maker here, has created his own Ninja Warrior course out of these Duplos here, where he wanted to recreate his own course, where he explored what it would look like for him to make something. And again, we are all makers at such a young age. And unfortunately, the education system moves that away from us. There's less making and more memorizing and spitting out exactly what we memorized. So I love these images from my son just because it's an example of what a young kid likes to do and how we need to embrace that and carry it through from grade to grade to grade and encourage our students to be makers, to be creators, because through that they will explore things that are important to them. And that's where meaningful comes in. So it's trying to define what meaningful is. So some will look at meaningful making as something that only impacts the greater society, something that helps the community improve or solve the problem a community is having. And I think that's really noble, and I think that's important. I think that's part of what meaningful is. But for me, meaningful making is when someone is creating something, they're making something that is meaningful to them. Because ultimately, the act of creation is something that is found within a person. They deep down want to create something, and to do that, it needs to be meaningful to them. And as we look at what students are capable of in the classroom, I think all teachers see the most amazing work coming from students when it is something that is meaningful to them. And we want to find a way to harness that and support that for our students. So we look at meaningful making in 3 different ways, and that's what we're going to focus on today, is those sort of 3 areas of what meaningful making looks like. So we're going to look at it from the perspective of teachers, students, and then communities at large. So we're going to look at these 3 areas, and we're going to start off with meaningful making for teachers. What does that look like, and why is that important? So I think the traditional view of making, we have a very nice teacher planner here. I remember having one of these my first handful of years teaching, where everything is nice and organized and what we're going to do on this day and what we're going to do on that day. And the thing is, a lot of teachers don't view themselves as makers, and that's crazy. Teachers are creating lessons every single day, all year, to make something important for their students, to create those memories. So as teachers, you shouldn't view yourself as just a teacher and you want to get involved in making. You've been making for years, as long as you've been a teacher, and when you were a student, and when you were a young child, you've been making for a very, very long time. And you want to embrace that sort of aspect and sort of empower yourself, saying, "Hey, I've been making for a long time." And as I started to explore making myself, I started to look at the things that really interested me. Because if I wanted to create a makerspace for my students and dive into these projects my kids were making, I felt like I needed to have a better understanding of what they were doing. So I dove into making myself. And one of the earliest projects I did was turn this old phone that was like in this box, it's called an executive phone, into an AirPlay system so that I could connect my phone to it, and then the sound would come out of the phone itself. And I added a little green light down there so it would turn green when it was on, and the little receiver plunger, when you push down on it, was the power button. I put all of this together, and I learned how to do it, learned how to do the coding through Raspberry Pi, and to wire everything up for the first time. I wanted to have that experience of going back to the things that I really enjoyed, which was taking things apart and putting them back together. And as a teacher, if we want our students to be engaged in making and finding things that are meaningful to them. It's so important for us to model that, to have these stories to share with our students when they struggle, when they're frustrated, and we need them to dig deep and power through. It's really important to have those stories. And one of the next projects I did was make a photo booth. This is version 1.0 out of wood, hastily put together. My second version is actually acrylic, and it's like see-through and kind of fun there. But you hit the button, the camera takes a picture, and it displays it right on the screen. And then I figured out how to upload it to Dropbox, and you can actually pull it down from the web and share it. These are things that were super complex at the time, and it's still pretty complex now, but I was able to figure it out. I was able to create these things, and it's so powerful when you create something. So there's a term out there that's really interesting and really applied to me this past week. It's called the IKEA effect. And the IKEA effect is the concept that when you build something personally, you take a tremendous amount of pride in it. It's like this feeling that you get when you build and make something is really powerful. And for anyone that's ever purchased or put together IKEA furniture, you know what that feels like. And I did that today or this week as I put together a new bed and chair for my son in his big boy bedroom. And there's this feeling of just having completed building this bed, that's a sense of pride that is awesome. And when you see kids do that in the classroom, it's even better, right? When they have that moment of, wow, I did this, I made this. And as a teacher, you want to have those moments as well. And as you go through the different projects that you're going to build, over my spring break, I built a arcade system little piece right here where I found the wood and I used the laser cutter we have at our school and bought all the pieces and tied it all together to play old video games. This is something that gave me a lot of street credit with the kids, for sure. But to show the students that I'm an active maker, that I am involved in the creation of things, is really important, as I want to encourage them to sort of explore what that looks like for them. So the big question you have to ask yourself, of course, is what do you want to make, right? As you think about that, what does that entail? Do you want to make music? Do you want to learn to play guitar and play songs and make music? Do you want to knit? Do you want to make a sweater? Do you want to make a hat? Do you want to just paint or draw or use pottery? And any of those things, for you, find out what that is. For me, it's technology, and I love it, and it's exciting for me. But for you, it could be something totally different. Don't let this concept of making it sort of in this mainstream education world right now be limited to technology. That's what I like, and that's what some students like. But I also have some kids that just love to come in and play with yarn and knit things. And that's them, that's what they're making. So as you decide what it is that you're going to make, you're going to want to share that. And as you decide what that is, you want to do more than anything else is find your tribe, is what we say. Find the people that you can connect to. Because when it comes to meaningful making, it's one thing to create something, but then when you get to share it with others and you get to brainstorm and say, I did this, or I need help with that, and you go through that process, you don't want making to be an isolated, independent process from start to finish. You want to be able to connect and share. One of my absolute favorite people in the entire world is Jenny McGarrett, and she is a very good friend of mine, and her book, Courageous Adventures, talks about classroom innovation. And she really drives home this point of how to get students to start thinking creatively and creating things and creating meaning for the things that are going on in your classroom. Jenny's a person that I can text or call, message, and just say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm creating this. Like, what do you think? And what are your thoughts and ideas around this? And another one that's just super amazing is Colleen Graves. Same thing. We presented at ISTE together this past year. She's got a few books out. The Big Book of Makerspace Project is an excellent example of projects that you can create with students in the classroom. She wrote it with her husband. So if you're looking for projects, here's a great resource. But Colleen's another person I can text and call and say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm creating this, I'm really thinking about some amazing things. What do you think about it? Or, hey, look what I did, this is neat. And she'll do the same thing. So it's important to find those people. Here are some great people that you should also consider following on Twitter. Heather, Diana, Sherry, Gary, Sylvia, the Raspberry Pi in general. These are some great educators that are a part of my tribe. These are some people that I look to as sounding boards and I can count on for inspiration and support or tweaks or an honest feedback that that thing looks weird, you really need to work on it. You need to have those people, and you can find them using the MakerEd hashtag, and of course the Demco Maker Chat hashtag that we will have coming up this April. 21st, if I'm not mistaken, 7 to 7:30 Eastern Time. We'll be talking about spaces and how we can create those spaces that support and nurture this maker concept. So you want to find this meaningful making for yourself as a teacher, because it's so critically important that you model this for your students. And it can be anything that you want. One of the most favorite things that I've ever made was I built a pond in my backyard, a two-tiered pond that has fish and plants, and I built it with my bare hands one summer, and I made it. And it's something that I get to enjoy every single year in the summer as I sit back by the pond. And it's something I share with kids. You might think that all I do is make code and things like that, but I love nothing more than to work by my pond and in the garden. So as teachers, you need to take a step back and think, what is it I'm passionate about? What is meaningful to me? And what is it that I want to make? And get to work on it, because kids want to see makers. It's what can inspire them to take their next steps. Now, when it comes to meaningful making for students, this is the big one, right? This is like, how do we create these experiences for students that allows them to make things that are meaningful to them? So this is one of my favorite pictures of my son as he watches the 3D printer, which is magic to him, and still even to me to this day. What 3D printers can do is still mind-blowing. And there's just this look of wonder that he has as he's watching this 3D printer go. And you want to encourage that with your students. And he's staring at this because he did a project. He actually designed by drawing this little stick figure guy, and then we 3D designed it, and then we printed it. And it was really exciting to see that, because he went through the entire design process. So as he watched that, he got to see what he was building, what he was making. And there he is, having created this. Like this little guy, I think he did this when he was around 5.5, 6 years old. He sat down and did the design process as a young kid and loved it and couldn't wait to get a hold of his own action figure and be able to play with it and share it with everyone. It was meaningful to him. Now, someone else might look at this and think, what a waste of time, and isn't that good? But for him, at his age and his skill level, it was meaningful to him. And that's something that's really, really important, is that we want to create opportunities for students to create things that are meaningful to them. So my son is really into Minecraft, as you can see here. And I love this photo of him. It's his hacker photo. He's got his hoodie up and his juice box out, and he's working on the Cano kit there, which is great. He's working on Scratch and loves to play with Scratch and build the code there. So these things are meaningful for him. So when I ask him to build something in Minecraft, he can do it so quickly. But when he's doing something that he wants to build, he builds it even faster with more passion and more detail. So we want to create those experiences for our kids that allow them to find those things that are meaningful to them. And for me, one of those things that really does it that I saw in my classroom was project-based learning. Giving students the opportunity to demonstrate understanding through the creation of projects is so critical to be able to create meaningful making experiences for them. One of my favorites is from a student, Nicole, who did these Gothic elements in photography. In our literature class, we read Gothic literature, and we discussed what the elements were that make up a Gothic story. So their project assignment was to create a project where they could demonstrate their understanding of what these Gothic elements were. So for her, she decided to do a photo shoot with her sister, where she was going to do makeup and create these setups that would be able to articulate visually what these Gothic elements would look like and what they're represented. And so she created these just stunning photos, just creepy and eerie and amazing. We'll go back one there. She did these photos just at her house, in her backyard, and she at the time was a 15-year-old sophomore who hadn't taken any photography classes and was a relatively quiet student in class. She presented these in class. She showed these photos that she made, and the students were blown away. There was a girl at the end that went up to her and said, "Are you signed up for the photography class?" And she says, "No, no, 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 no." And she goes, "We're going to your counselor and we're going to sign you up next year for the photography class because you have to take it because you are amazing." This quiet girl, all red in the cheeks now, embarrassed this attention, but she has this profound skill that she was able to use and share with the class. And it was beautiful. She's able to make this, and this is meaningful to her. These are photos that she spent time and energy and the makeup and the outfits, and she said she took hundreds of photos, but only shared, I think, the final 10 of them that she thought were best. She dove into this and spent her time, and it's something that's so meaningful to her, for her to create, to make. And that's something that's really powerful for her. Another student, I don't know how the odds of this happening in a different class, but she decided to attack the uh, project in a similar fashion. And she was more focused on the artwork of the faces as opposed to the photography. So the projects were the same but different. She wanted to tell the story through the work that she was doing through the makeup. And this one is affectionately called Zipper Face. And here is a can embedded in her sister's eye, but the fire in the background. They had their dad start a fire in the background of the fireplace there to sort of give this extra element that they were trying to sell here. And Sam created these images to tell the story of her understanding of these Gothic elements. So for me as a teacher, I'm able to look at these photos as they're presented in class and say, they absolutely understand what these elements are. They spent the time reading the stories, looking for examples, looking for inspiration, and for them to be able to create something brand new, to make something that didn't exist before, to tell the story, to demonstrate to me that they understood what these Gothic elements were, is far better than any multiple choice test could ever provide me that information, right? These are two of just many, many, many different projects for this specific unit that I received that tell this really powerful story of what it looks like. So there's a video here that will be too choppy to play over this webinar, but this whole presentation will be shared with you, so you'll be able to actually come back and watch us. So I'll do just a brief bit of explaining as to what it is. At the end of the marking period, end of the year, we really had a wrap-up project. And I asked students to compare characters from Catcher in the Rye and The Great Gatsby. Find something that shows that they are similar and identify a symbol that can go along with all of this. So over the years, when I introduce projects, I always give kids like examples. Like, so you can make a movie, you can do paintings, you can do a puppet show, you can do all these different things. And always at the end, I go, you could even do interpretive dance. And I always chuckle and secretly hope that someone would do interpretive dance. But this year, two students, they came to me and said, "Mr. P, we want to do interpretive dance." And I was like, don't mess with me. Like, I'm being serious. They're like, we're being serious. We think we have it. We have an idea. They're like, how many songs should we do? Like, how long should the dances be? And I just looked at them and said, I have no idea. And they looked at me expecting to have like these answers. And I said, you two are the experts in this. You do the show choir and you do singing and dancing. I go, I trust you to create something that meets these benchmarks that I've outlined for this project. And they kind of were taken aback because students aren't used to having this sort of control, this trust from their teacher to create the overall guidelines to demonstrate understanding for a specific unit. So they went away and they spent the week and they created these 4 beautiful dances to represent to each individual character and how they are similar. and they incorporated a symbol within each dance. And the songs they chose, the dances they created were just stunning. It is one of those projects where I could have retired and said, I've done it all. I have accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish, with this project as being a perfect example of that. And the students presented this in class, and I had a rubric that was going to identify all the different things that were going to be graded there. And at the end of it, I realized this rubric couldn't tell me what I wanted to do to grade these kids, because no rubric could justify the amazingness that I'd seen in this project. Kids were standing and applauding. Other kids had said, I don't understand anything about dance, but everything you did, I totally understand in connection to the story. And these two girls created something that was so meaningful to them. They will forever remember these stories and what they did. And that's what's so important when we talk about meaningful making, is that we want these situations for students to be so important to them. And when you give students the control, when you give them choice, it gives them a voice in their education. And that's an important part of meaningful making. We want them to have this part of it. Another example is I had a group of 4 students for their Great Gatsby project, where they had to demonstrate understanding of 2 themes and 2 symbols. They decided as a group of 4 they were going to create their own rap and create the music and write all of the lyrics. And it was 3 guys and 1 girl, and they created just this amazing rap that each person was a character from the book, and they sort of shared their sort of first person point of view of how the story unfolded for them by touching on the themes and touching on the symbols. And it was amazing. And these kids were so passionate about this that they spent this time creating the music and writing the lyrics that went along with the music that the one student had created, and recording it before school, after school, on their phones, and being able to edit it all together and then to share it to class. These projects I've been showing, there's sort of like this myth of like, oh, kids are so mean to each other all the time, and they'll laugh at kids who do something different. I mean, these are kids that showed an interpretive dance to their entire class. There's this group of kids that are rapping for their entire class, and this idea that kids are going to make fun of those kids, it's not happening, because everyone is doing something that matters to them. It's meaningful, and so they embrace it and they're supportive of it because they are doing something that matters, and kids can respect that. So as we look at meaningful making for students, it's about giving them the opportunity to create in those spaces. Now, the next step forward, as I looked at project-based learning, was to create an actual space that allowed kids access to more tools. So to look at meaningful making in makerspaces, and this may be specifically why some of you have joined this webinar, is to talk a lot about meaningful making in makerspaces. For these students, I wanted them to have access to more tools so that their project possibilities could broaden, and we want to look at that. And so over this past year, I've had students sit down and work in Scratch to make video games, 3D design, a myriad of things. This one is a little present for her older sister who turned 13. Another one is just the initials of our school and a CNC machine. And these 6th grade boys have been working with a team to build a gigantic box fort. They've been collecting cardboard all over the place to build their own little fort. In this one, we've had students working with CNC machines and the laser cutter and makey-makeys to build their own controllers for the video games that they were building using Scratch for their 6th grade math class. The 6th grade math teacher was looking for a different way to approach teaching XY coordinates, and so we teamed up utilizing the makerspace to create video games on Scratch, arcade games, where kids would have to move their characters around the XY coordinate plane and understand how that worked. And the extension of that was to build these little controllers using makey-makey to control the characters of the game they've created. In giving students the freedom to design their own controllers, to design the games that they wanted, was important because the kids engaged with it. The making was meaningful to them because they weren't just following a recipe. They weren't just following directions and every single kid creating the same game. when that happens, kids get bored, they're not interested, they're disengaged. But to say, hey, I just want you to create a video game. That's what he wants you to do. And as they had questions about XY coordinates and things moving along, that's where this instruction came in from the math teacher. And it was powerful because she would take those opportunities to talk about how a negative number here, a negative number there will cause the point to move on this plane. And these students have a deeper understanding of XY coordinates than I had definitely ever did in sixth grade because they did something that was meaningful to them. I had a student who just loved to design and doodle, and I saw one of her pieces, and I said, "That is stunning." I go, "How would you like to carve that into this wood I have?" She's like, "No way." I go, "Yes way." So we took her design and we plugged it into the computer, and here we have the carved out version, then the cleaned up carved out version. And she had this, was able to take it home and just show this to her, and as a place for her to generate her art. And she spent break doing all of these sketches in her sketchbook, and she's excited to do some more work. But the makerspace has been a place for her to come and just create. It's a place for her to feel comfortable that she can just design and make mistakes and start over and try new things. And what's important is that it's meaningful to her, but the space that she's doing it in, this makerspace, the Knight's Forge we call it, is a place that gives it even more meaning because it's supportive. She knows that she can come here and what she does will be 100% respected and supported. And that's what you want to do, is create an environment where students are making, and when they are making something that's meaningful to them, they feel good and they feel safe about it. This is one of my favorite photos. I was working and I looked up, and all of a sudden I saw all of these sixth, seventh, and eighth grade girls working on different projects, running the gamut. We had girls coding, doing physical computing, using the 3D printer, and doing design, and it was just intense. And I labeled this picture "Who Run the World," because for me, one of my goals this year was to get more girls involved in these STEM projects, these STEAM projects, because we know there's been a just drastic drop in women in these fields, and it's really important to get them at a young age to say, hey, these are things that you can do, these are things that are awesome and fun, and you can design and create in so many different ways. You want to encourage it. So when I looked up and saw this room just filled with these girls doing all these different projects, it just really made me smile because it's so empowering for them to look around and see other girls doing these things and supporting each other as they encounter obstacles when it comes to code or design. And so for them, these weren't projects I assigned. Every single one of them were working on individual things that they wanted to. And it was important to them. It was meaningful. So if you can provide them with this meaningful making opportunities, they will grow, they will explore. And so the sixth graders I'm really excited about because I'll have them for the next 2 years as they continue to add on to these skills that they're learning. So as we look at this transition from teachers to students to the overall community, right? This sort of scaffolded approach of teachers can do these things, then the students can see them do these things, and the students can learn and do these things. They'll bring it to the community to create even more meaningful making. So this is where I touched on sort of that original definition I had mentioned previously, where it's the idea of, well, meaningful making means something just for the community. And like I said, it's part of the story. It's one aspect of it. And so, as like just to quote, and Peter Parker's Uncle Ben told him, "With great power comes great responsibility." Right? This is the nerdy part of the nerdy teacher, and it's true. When we teach these kids how important it is to utilize these skills to solve problems, to address problems, meaningful making, we want kids to look at their community and be an active participant in it. We want them to strive to make it better for everyone. And so with that comes this responsibility. If we were to encourage kids to make and working on these problem solving skills, these creative skills, we want to encourage them to explore things that are important. So there's one great website I want to share with you. It's a great program. It's called Enabling the Future. And it is a program that's designed to help create prosthetics for kids. Now, What's really great about this is that they provide you with the 3D printer files and the wires and the screws and everything like that. And all you have to do is print the pieces and then assemble it. And you send it back to them, and then this prosthetic will go to a young person in need. And when I learned about this, I just thought this is the most amazing thing for students to explore. And the reason for that is I did more and more research about this is that prosthetics are very expensive. And for young children that need prosthetics that are constantly growing, they grow through multiple versions of a prosthetic over the course of their life until adulthood. And so it can be completely impossible for some families who need prosthetics for their young children to be able to afford them. So this organization works to support those wonderful families that need this help. And so when you look at making, you look at this idea of like, well, how can this be important? How can you support this community? You know, bringing students together to explore, first of all, like the anatomy of what a hand looks like. How do you create a robotic hand, a prosthetic hand? How does that work? And use that lesson to create something that's going to improve someone's life. It's hard for me not to get choked up every time I see this slide, because we take for granted so many things every single day. And, you know, one of it as simple as having two hands, you know, we take for granted because it's something that we don't think about. But by setting your kids up to create these prosthetics for these kids, they're able to do things that they just quite literally could not do before. You have the one kid holding the sword, which probably isn't the best graphic for this, but you know, to hold, to make the little heart symbol with two hands, to be able to wave, to be able to, you know, hold your parent's hand. You know, we think of these things, and I think of my son and how this can absolutely change their world by having this opportunity to engage in meaningful making, to create something that will have a significant impact on a young person's life. So some people look at this and say, well, it's just making, printing things and putting it together and sending it. How is that meaningful? You know, for the teacher, that's sort of like our job, right? Is to make this meaningful for them, to explain to them, to take the science approach and maybe talk about the physiology of what happens when someone doesn't have a hand or is born with a partial limb, to explore how fingers and thumb and hands function and the bones and how we can recreate this. So there's definitely the educational standpoint position where you can learn so much from a project like this. I mean, that's something that I think is very important and very powerful for sure. And we definitely want to explore that in as many ways as we possibly can. But the other side of it is sometimes when you have the ability to do good things, you should take that opportunity and do good. Again, going back to that Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. You know, for my students, I say, you know, we're very lucky, very privileged to have the support and the tools to create these different things. You know, it's really important for us to find a way to give back to our community, whether it's locally or the state community, the national community, whatever that is. It's important us to find those opportunities to give back. And so when you can use this to teach empathy to your students, to show them why it's so important to do these things when you have the opportunity to do these things, it takes this sort of idea of meaningful making to a whole new level. This slide is always near the end of my presentations because sometimes there's this feeling of I'm not going to be any good and I'm going to fail at this. And sometimes that's what happens when we can't start, right? It prevents us from moving forward. So Adventure Time is a great cartoon. I love it. And Jake the dog has a quote, sucking at something is sort of the first step at becoming sort of good at something. You know, I like this better than the whole we all fell off our bike the first time we tried to ride, but it's the same sentiment, right? Is that very few people are 100% perfect and amazing at things the very first time they try it. And I think it's important that we remind not only our students, but ourselves of this. It's so easy to, for students to watch YouTube and see someone do something and wow, isn't that amazing? But not see the hundreds of hours of time that they put in to master whatever it is that they're watching on the video, right? So it's important that for making to be meaningful, you need to fail a whole bunch, right? You need to be bad at it. There's way more meaning when you're bad at something, you learn it, you get better, and you accomplish it. Internally, there's way more meaning in that completion, in that final product, right? Uh, I give the example of math, which was never my strong suit. I tried and I tried and I tried. And I remember one homework assignment I got a B plus on. It was the highest grade that I've ever received in a math assignment. I was so proud. I put in the hours to do this, just the right way. And the kid behind me always gets A's, got an A, and didn't think twice about it, right? But that B plus was so meaningful to me because of the hard work that went into it. So as we look at sort of the process of learning to do anything, we need to embrace the fact that we're going to be bad at it and understand that that's part of it is what makes it so meaningful when we finally accomplish it in the long run. So as we wrap up this webinar here before we get to questions for people, I took all of my experiences in building a makerspace and I put it together in a book, and you can totally find this on Demco's page. But it's this approach to getting started with makerspaces. And I talk about project-based learning and the role it can play in makerspaces. And as we look to explore what meaningful making is for you, you need to take that time to sort of reflect and see where you are in your maker journey. If you are a novice, that's great. Start there and just think about what it is that you've always wanted to make and what it takes to learn how to do it. If you're more advanced, find ways to add on to that, right? Find ways to take that next step forward, because as we look at what this means to be involved in meaningful making and how that's going to be an important part of not just your life as a teacher, but of the students' life as they continue to learn and grow and make beyond your class and beyond school and into life, what that's going to look like. And these moments are so important for our students that when we give them these opportunities to create, that it is meaningful to them, because otherwise they'll just view making as just another thing that they were forced to do and recreate in class that wasn't important to them. So as you wrap up this webinar and you go home or you go to your living room and you sit and you think about this, just think of the different ways you can allow your students more choice, to give them more of a voice in their education. And by doing that, it can make meaningful making an important part of your educational philosophy, which will help create students that are excited and passionate about the creation of things that are meaningful to them. And I really think if, as teachers across this country, around this world, we dedicate that time, we will have a different group of students that become adults, ready to tackle some of the big problems that are facing the world now that we need them to solve, because we can't seem to get that done right now. So I want to thank everyone who has joined us for this webinar. I really, really appreciate it. And we're going to take some questions now and see what people have asked as we kind of move forward. So I guess I'll turn this back over and we'll go from questions from there.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was really some excellent information. I love the example you gave of the prosthetic hands. I think that's a great organization that I've looked into, and it's pretty amazing work. Our first question came in asking about suggestions on how to fund a makerspace project. It can be some expense in some of these, and wondering if you have any ideas on where that funding might come from.
Yes. So one, I'm definitely going to point you to the blog post I wrote in February on ideas.demco.com. I actually wrote a lot about funding, so you can definitely check that out for more detailed examples. But Some of the best ways to fund a makerspace is one, look at local granting institutions. One of the things that I found is that granting institutions sometimes are not giving out all the money that they want because a lot of people just assume, oh, I can never get that grant. Right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Take the time, write a really powerful grant about how these tools are going to impact student learning, and you can be surprised at how much money you can get from grants. Another way to look at maybe stocking a makerspace is to reach out to parents. So many parents have things in their basement they'd be more than happy to donate. They could be boxes and buckets of Legos. It could be old computers for students to take apart and explore. There's definitely plenty of resources from parents. And I found that sending an email with sort of like a checklist, hey, if you have these things, please drop them off in the makerspace. That's another way to do it. And sometimes just reaching out to local businesses and saying, hey, we're building this makerspace, especially trade businesses. They really view makerspaces as a gateway to getting kids into these skills that are important to them as part of a trade. So reaching out to them and saying, hey, instead of just asking for money, saying, would you mind funding or donating a 3D printer? Would you mind funding or donating a CNC machine? Because a lot of businesses would much rather donate a specific item instead of just giving money, because too often businesses feel that by giving money to education, it just sort of disappears into the black hole of the general fund. But if you can ask them for a specific item, they might feel more inclined to spend $500 on something as opposed to just writing a $500 check. So those are just a few, but definitely check out the blog post I wrote in February on ideas.demco.com for more detailed approaches to funding.
Oh, thanks, Nick. We had a question come in about helping students get started. And while meaningful making is important, it's also important to kind of help them skill up a little bit on different pieces of technology. And how do you kind of develop some activities to, and is it a good idea to just develop some activities to help kids get the skills necessary so they can be a little bit more autonomous in their making?
So every class is filled with a variety of students with various levels, right? So even two similar classes with different kids could be in completely different spaces. So for me, I have found that it's important to scaffold the projects from the start of the year to more guided projects at the beginning, and it leads them to, by the end of the year, fully, independent, autonomous project building. And so I have found through project-based learning and giving these students opportunities for meaningful making, it's important to be engaged as the teacher and sort of this guide on the side that help point them in the direction of different tools or support them in the use of various tools. Some people think that project-based learning is a teacher assigns a project and they put their feet up on their desk and they read the newspaper. My transition to project-based learning had me more active in a classroom than ever before. And that's great. I'm getting from table to table and talking to kids, listening to their ideas and pointing them in this direction, helping them with that direction, making a suggestion here or there. It's an active role as a teacher when it comes to project-based learning. And that's true for first grade through high school. As a teacher, you're actively involved in supporting them. And so what that support looks like will change from student to student, group to group, project to project. There have been times I've pointed kids in the direction of 3D printing, and there are other times I pointed to kids towards making puppets because that's totally what they were trying to do, but couldn't quite seem articulated. So I've always found my job as a person to support the students when they need support and help steer them in the direction that I think they're trying to get to, but maybe can't articulate. So it definitely is time. That's the dirty work in the trenches, so to speak, when it comes to project-based learning. But you'll find that the more experience you have with it and the students can become more comfortable with sort of this layout of how a project works, there'll be more of a flow to it. And you'll know ultimately, not very long after you start this, which students will need more support versus the ones that can totally get this on their own. And I think that's true for any assignment any teacher gives over the course of a year. You learn very quickly who the high flyers are and the ones that might need extra attention to help them be successful.
Okay, this next question is really a two-parter. The first part is how can I incorporate maker activities throughout my school? And then the second part is how do we get the staff to understand how maker spaces and library go hand in hand to guide student inquiry, problem solving, and creating a product? So, how do we get it into the school, and how do we help the teachers and educators understand why it's so important and how the library can be involved in that?
Whew, there's the doozy of the questions there. Okay, so how do we get into the schools? So for me, I have found it's through project-based learning is uh, the easy access approach because you don't need to talk about maker spaces or making when you talk about project-based learning. And you'll find that some teachers are already involved in project-based learning. They're already doing it. They might not call it that, and they might not have the buzzwords floating around along with it, but many teachers are actively doing project-based learning. Especially in lower elementary, it's really a lot of projects if you think about it, right? As kids demonstrate understanding of these new topics and skills that they're encountering. So as a librarian, as a makerspace director for me and for librarians out there, it is getting out of the library, which can be tough at times, I know, or inviting teachers down and say, hey, I heard you're doing this project, why don't you come down? I have some great resources that you can check out, and these students could use these tools, and it can be a great place for them to come down and really explore the different opportunities. So, project-based learning is your sort of your entry into those classrooms, and then to get more classrooms actively involved in the space. I have found a lot of success in co-teaching lessons with teachers and sort of bringing the makerspace elements to those lessons to sort of support, because teachers are hesitant because they're afraid they're going to have to know how to use everything that needs to be known about a 3D printer, and that they don't have the time for that. So I have found by working with these teachers and saying, hey, I'll help with this aspect of it. You worry about the content and I'll work about the project side of it, and we'll work together on this. And being there by their side is super helpful, because after the first time you really go through it, they'll have a tremendous amount of confidence to explore the next time around on their own, and they'll feel a little bit stronger about that. I was talking to a friend about sort of like this other day, this idea of 3D printers. There used to be a time when teachers weren't allowed to use copy machines. For the more veteran teachers out there, do you remember that? Like the idea of you using the copy machine was insane, and other people had to make copies for you. Now, of course, we all make our own copies, and it's really frustrating because it jams and you tone it all over yourself, but we can do that. 3D printers will eventually be viewed the same way, where right now there's a very select few of people in the building that know how to use the 3D printer effectively, and it's super complex. And over time, it's going to get very easy, very accessible, very cheap, so that there are multiples throughout the entire building. And any teacher can just show up, load the print, hit print, and walk away like they do for traditional paper copier. So I think over time, as teachers utilize the library, and that's where the librarians really have to sort of step up and become more actively involved in the other classrooms. And it can be tough, it can be awkward. You never want to just insert yourself into a lesson. But having those conversations in the hallways, I have found to be really successful, just to see, what are you working on? Like, hey, you know what? This could be really helpful in that area, and I'll totally help you in every single class. So as long as you make yourself available to support these teachers, you'll find some that are really willing to do it. And if you see students that are exploring, different projects, reaching out to those students and saying, hey, I have an idea for you for your project to go a little bit of a different direction. And if those students, really engage in using the makerspace, they go back to their class, they do their presentations, other students see them having used these tools, and the teachers start to think, well, hey, maybe more of our kids could do that. So it's trying to find those early adopters and those that are willing to explore, and have them talk it up as well. Find those teachers that are totally down to explore the makerspace, and work with them and have them talk it up in their department meeting and the staff meeting. You really, word of mouth is probably the best way that you'll get it, but it definitely requires more boots on the ground from the librarian standpoint to get into classes and be more active as an advocate for the makerspace than the traditional library sense, where teachers know there are books and they go down and get books. But since the makerspace offers so many diverse tools and opportunities, definitely need to be more vocal and more interactive with teachers and their lessons.
Okay, I think we have time for one more quick question here. Question came in, what tools have you seen successfully used that allow kids to articulate deeper learning kind of post-project?
Wow, great question. So some tools that stand out like immediately, like so they're the big ones, right? The 3D printers, the Dremel makes an amazing 3D printer. The 340, 3D45 are excellent for kids to design and create. Laser cutters are really powerful and nice. CNC machines. Big fan of Little Bits as kids have explored engineering and electronics and creation in that area. Um, but like sort of post creation, um, I have found that really the best reflection can take place in the classroom, whether digitally or in a journal. Having kids explore the process in which they created, the design process, right? Creation, prototype, fabrication, and at any point where they need to start over. Uh, Sometimes it doesn't take fancy technology or crazy tools. It's just a piece of paper and a pencil to explore the process and what it took to make that process happen. And for them, and even for the teacher too, the reflection is important. But with reflection, if it becomes a regular part of your process when it comes to implementing project-based learning and meaningful making for them, the reflection part will help them grow not only as like a person and as a learner, but for the next project as well. They'll have this either remembered or written down sort of reflection on, oh, this is the process that works best for me. And so you always want to make sure you build in reflection time for yourself as a teacher, but for the students as well, so that they can grow as a learner. Otherwise, they might make the same mistake over and over and over again, which I'm sure many of the teachers listening have seen over and over again from students. But for us as educators, we don't want to make the same mistakes over and over again. So it's important for us to reflect and for the students to reflect. And the simplest tool can be pen and paper. If you want something more streamlined, a Google form would work really, really well for kids just to sort of fill it out and get that feedback if you're looking more for feedback. But I think personal reflection is best for students and for teachers so that you can have significant growth over time. So I think that's probably the best way you can approach that question.
Okay, excellent. It looks like we are out of time for today. I would really like to thank Nicholas for sharing his insights with us all today. I hope that everyone was able to take away some ideas that they can implement in their own makerspace or as they begin their own makerspace. A recording of this webcast will be available on the Demco Ideas and Inspiration website by next week. That's ideas.demco.com. So you can review the presentation and share that with your colleagues. You'll also receive an email that will include the slides, a resource list, and the Q&A. You'll be receiving a survey at the end of the webinar to let us know how we did. If you would please take a few minutes to give us your feedback and thoughts, it'll help us develop future webinar topics. Please look for our full library of on-demand webinars that you can watch at your convenience at ideas.demco.com. Again, thank you for joining us today and have a wonderful afternoon.